Hi, and welcome to the Wise Heart Wellness Scientist Sage Sangha. We're so glad to have you with us tonight. We're talking about fear. And if you made it past the name of the topic tonight, you're doing great. But there's so many people right now out in the world that are very, very fearful. The level of fear seems to be increasing just about daily. And people come in and they are finding things both big and small that are causing them to be in fear more and more. And then they take that fear into their work, into their families, into their recreation even, and they're getting less satisfaction out of life, and they're being overwhelmed all the time and getting tricked into trying to fix the problem so they don't have to feel fearful. But of course, the issues that we see in front of us today are more than we can fix alone. But it gives us a terrible sense of uncertainty. And so the fears are just taking over. And I really wanted to talk a lot about the strategies that we have for fear, because the fears are there. Everybody has fears. And what we do with them is more the problem. And so if we have a strategy where we are going to fix everything so we never have to feel fear, that generally is problematic. If we have a strategy that we just distract ourselves, and that distraction can be busyness or avoiding things or using something to make us feel better, or distracting with things like media or busyness or overwork. But distraction isn't meant for this kind of ongoing state. It's meant for small moments of things. And when we distract for too long, we can actually forget that we're fearful and just see it as our normal state. And then it becomes more and more problematic. I was listening to someone today tell me about having a conflict with someone, and it clearly came from the fearful thoughts they held in their head. And they recognized it afterwards as, that person didn't intend to communicate that to them, but the person interpreted their behavior and actions in the way of that fearful view of it and the things she was afraid of happening. And so that's the problem that we have with this. If we have a strategy that doesn't work well, we end up getting really tied into things. And I'm going to flip to a picture that we have, or a chart that we have in the email that we sent out for this week's Sangha. And if you don't get the email and you would like to, feel free to drop me an email at scientistsage@gmail.com, and we can put you on that list or send you this diagram if you'd like it. Just a moment. Here we go. Share screen. Okay, there we go. And I talk a lot about this idea about two paths for the flow of fear. And it really can go in two ways. We go into contraction, and then we try and control. We literally, now I'm sort of acting this out, but I just realized you're seeing the picture, not me. But literally, our physical bodies can contract. When I'm sitting with someone or a group of people in a teaching session, I will say, did you notice how your shoulders came forward and your chest dropped down? And we have a physical contraction when we are trying to not feel the fear, or we'll move away from it. And then we move into control of things. And it's really confusing, especially like if we're afraid of something that we can't have any influence over, like the way politicians are behaving, or choices somebody else is making that we're fearful about. We move into control strategies, but they become very confusing because we really don't have impact on it. And then often people will, fight back if we're trying to control them, or we will realize more and more that we don't have control over other situations. we can go and vote for a politician and even work for their campaign, but we cannot control how all the politicians are behaving or who actually wins in a race we're concerned about. And so we move into more confusion because our strategy of control doesn't work. And then we get into more conflict with ourselves, like, why should I bother keep doing this? Or, what am I supposed to be doing? This doesn't feel right. Or those people aren't doing it right and it should be different. And the conflict increases. And we retain all of the beginning fearful feelings and start to add to it. And then we start disconnecting. We disconnect from our inner self because we think that if we pay attention to our inner self, we will feel more uncomfortable because we will feel the fear more clearly. We will feel the lack of control more clearly. So we disconnect. And we disconnect from others. In a state of fear, we are far less likely to turn towards relationships. We actually struggle more in them when we're in a state of fear all the time. So there's this disconnection, a sense of being homeless. There's no place where we fit or where we can feel safe. So that path, just pursuing it, rarely leads to a good outcome. On the other hand, fear is there all the time. There are fears that will come and go through our lives. And if we follow the expansion path, where we take in some curiosity. Now, this isn't sitting calmly in my chair, looking around, wondering why the house is on fire. We want to do something if there is an actual thing. So we have curiosity. We go and see, is this something that I need to act on right away? But beyond that is that we might be curious about, is this something that I am just feeling in my body? Is there a real threat outside? Or is this an old threat that happened previously in my life? And something caused me to be triggered by it again. And I'm feeling the old fearful feelings, but there's not a current threat. So that curiosity can do a lot to help us sort through those things and choose a different strategy about how to work with things. And another big part of it is compassion. We really, in our society, there's this idea that we shouldn't feel fear or feel fear and do it anyway, which is really like saying, feel fear and be unconscious and just jump off the edge anyway. What we're talking about compassion is to be gentle and present and go, oh, there's that fear again. And I may know that there is no sense to it. Maybe I'm afraid of dandelions, and there's no sense to being fearful of it. A dandelion is not going to chew off my leg. It might, annoy my neighbors and make my lawn not look as good, but it isn't this hugely threatening thing. So I can have compassion, though, around that. And I can feel what is going on. And I might feel that, I don't think that I'm doing well in life if I'm not taking care of the dandelions. I'm failing somehow. Or I might feel that people in my neighborhood will be mad at me. But I can just feel those feelings. And if I can just feel and release them, I can start to clear out space for more action, but intelligent, considered, guided kind of action. Because as I release those things, I can be connected again. I might go across the street and ask my neighbor, how are you controlling the dandelions? Or I might, talk to my neighbor and say, no, I'm letting the dandelions grow so the bees will stop at my house. But I can connect again, connect to my executive function that can think, connect to my intuition that can actually guide me through something, help me know if there's a real threat or if it is just a feeling I need to sit with. I get that reconnection. And the flow of fear on this side can actually take me into a peaceful place. It can guide me to what things I need to look at and to work with and move on with. Where on the other side of contraction, it just starts an endless loop, like that infinity loop that we see. It looks like a figure eight where you just keep going through the loops. So these are the two paths for the flow of it. But I'd like you to think about the idea of these strategies, because we have the regular ones, like the fight, flight, fear, or flight, fight, freeze. Well, and in my case, as a compulsive eater, feed and bond. If you are a people pleaser, a whole bunch of things like that. But those, there's a lot of practice in those kinds of things that has been useful sometimes. If people grow up in violent homes, to freeze and sort of, not exist is useful for them at that time. But often it goes beyond those times where those things are actually useful and into this constant state where we're moving more people into that right now, unless we're really conscious in processing the fear out. And so people will go into that. And instead of being sort of interested in that sort of way, it's about being controlling because we're overwhelmed. And that absolutely leads to a freeze response, a fearful freeze response. And we might ignore things because we just can't cope. And so, the high prices, the inflation, and that has got a lot of people very frightened, and justly so. We're not talking that there's not real fearful things out there. There are. It's about how the strategy that we deal with them. And so that idea about that is so important to watch and see what is our strategy. Do we fight? Are we angry about things all the time? Do we, distract with those, substitute satisfaction so we don't have to feel that way? And it really isn't just my fear, it's our fear. And if I can understand that as well, I don't feel so isolated, because if it's our fear, then I feel that connection. But if I think it's only me, like everybody else has all this stuff handled, but I don't, that kind of fear, every time we get disconnected, we are more fearful, not less fearful. So it's really important to think about that, the way that I am trying to protect myself. Because first of all, do I need to protect myself? And can I reconnect, open up to that flow and go, okay, I don't know what to do here. I want some guidance. And the guidance may come, just as an inspiration in your mind, or you might have an idea to speak to somebody, or you may have some sort of faith tradition that you practice that helps you find guidance, and you'll feel a different response. And often people will come up with very unique things quite spontaneously. They'll even sort of start moving towards it before they know really what it is. And then they'll say, oh, that felt made me feel better. And so that sort of unknown positive response, if we can make enough space for it, it's really useful. But even if we can't get there, befriending our fear is a really useful pathway. And it can be like, oh, okay, I'm having this fear and I'm not in immediate danger. But it's okay for me to feel afraid. I can be compassionate and gentle with myself while I'm feeling afraid. And in that way, I start to release some of the energy. When I'm fighting it, it's like the Borg response, resistance is useless. And we don't want to create more conflict in ourselves. So knowing that I'm afraid, acknowledging I'm afraid, finding paths that work for me. And it might be as simple as putting your hand on your heart, because a lot of the time we're afraid, we start to close in like this. And when we do that, we start to relax back out. And the idea that, everything, the world is going horrible. I mean, many, 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 many times since the world has begun, and even since we were recording it, people have come to that idea and said those things. The world is horrible, it's ending now. We all thought that was going to happen in 2000, and, time and time again. So it's, how do I live in this world right now on a friendly basis with my fear, Because as that happens, fear can teach us things. Fear can show us what we want because we're afraid of not getting it. Fear can show us people that are safe for us and those that are not, because we feel fearful around them. And if we sort through, is that an old response or a current one, that there is some information that's valuable, we can really make use of that. Many people have said that I knew there was something off about that person, but I just, I didn't want to be mean. or, so it's really, really important to connect in that way and work out those things, because we want to be able to develop that awareness. And it starts with awareness of myself, awareness of my body. My body is a really good sensor for fear and fearful situations. And sometimes I ignore it, and then I get not well in my body. And so when I'm feeling not well, when I have a headache, things like that, I'll go back and like, where did I go against what my body thought was a good idea? And usually there was something fearful. Like it might have been as simple as, oh, that's going to make me stay up too late. And my body's usually right. And I can shift those things and move towards more peace away from the fear. Because the basic body things like having enough water and food and sleep actually affects how we perceive things if we perceive them fearfully. And so checking those things is really, really useful, just to go along to the next thing. And then start the attending and befriending. So I'm not saying don't pay attention to things. I'm saying pay attention a little differently to fear and see what it has to tell you, see what it has to teach you. And so the idea of recognizing, releasing, and returning to ourselves. So recognizing that I feel fearful, because people will often say, no, no, I'm not. And I'll say, well, what made you make that decision? And they said, well, I don't want this to happen. That's fear. It's not this big fear like, oh my God, I'm going to die. It's the little fear that says, no, no. And if we know those things, we can make more conscious choices. It's not about overriding our fear. It really is about being present and gentle and really connecting with ourselves when we're fearful. We do a lot of what ifing, like, okay, if I do this, what if? What about that? What if that? What if this? And it's not useful most of the time because it's fearful most of the time. Can you imagine if we sat around what ifing, like, what if it turned out this good? We would probably put some fear into it. If it turns out that good, what will I do? And often the phenomenon of people responding negatively to their success by self-sabotage is that fearful response. Somehow we tie it to some fearful outcome, that, I will be in a relationship but really eventually they'll leave me because, I'm not good enough or I'm not okay enough to be with. Or if I have success in business, then it'll take too much out of me, or then people will want to steal my idea or my money. And we what if into that fearful side, even if we start out positive sometimes. So we want to practice living like, what if I just sat with my fear and talked to it? There's a Buddhist story of the Buddha sitting with the goddess Maya that was bringing disturbance. And he says to her, Maya, come and sit and have tea with me. And if we can do that with our fears, that could change everything. So we're going to do a little contemplation of fear. And I invite people to find, just bring up a fear that not a huge one, but just something that you might feel on a frequent basis, and it might be as simple as, being afraid of, your pet getting out of the yard, or It might be fearful about, the bank rate rising again, or a particular politician getting voted in. And so it doesn't have to be a reasonable fear. It doesn't have to be, a big fear, just something that you play with. And just hold that for a moment, and we'll move into that whole response practice. Okay. And so I invite people that are on live to shut off their cameras if they want to, put up your feet, take your clothes off, whatever you want to do there, but make sure your camera's off. And if you're watching this later, thank you very much. And feel free to contact us if you want to be part of the live part of this practice. We're here every Tuesday night almost and talk about interesting things to do with single words, doing an exploration and a practice of some kind. So let's get right into it. Let's take a deep breath. And if you had a fear that you want to work with, just bring it up and let yourself poke around at it a bit. Noticing, first of all, does it have an impact on your body? Is there a place in your body that you really feel it when you think of it? It might change your posture. You might get tense a bit. Or you might curl up a little bit. Or you might puff up a little bit. We like to resist fear that way too. You might feel it right in your stomach or your breathing. Some of my social fears I feel a little slimed by when I feel them. Mhm. And let yourself come into full awareness. There might be an idea or even a sentence that you're repeating. It might be something like, I'll never be successful in relationships, or my career will never amount to anything, or I will never get my house cleaned. It can be anything. These small things actually nag us a lot. Or it could be something more difficult to manage, the fear of the death of a loved one, or a memory of fear from a past difficult traumatic situation. Hold these very gently, letting yourself move in and out of it. We don't want you to put yourself into it and force yourself to stay with it. Your body has the wisdom to allow you to come and go. Your mind will touch and move when it needs to if we let it. You might imagine in your life your body just opening up. Open palm, letting go of things. And even just asking to be cleansed of fears, even fears you don't know you have. Asking to befriend those fears that you maybe need to get to know better. And tuning into a feeling of safety. And that might be you feeling safe in your home while you listen to this. And it might be that hand on your chest or hand on your stomach or both. There's lots of evidence that when we put our hands on our body like that, that our body starts to calm down. A tremendous part of fear is helping our body stay calm. Helping our body remember that we're all right now. And we can let this rush of emotions, movement of energy move through us. Not that we are solving it or talking it away, convincing ourselves it's not a problem, but just releasing some energy around it. And we'll close with just putting the ask out there for guidance with this. Not how do I get rid of it, but just guidance. What is this fear teaching me? Or how shall I interact with it right now? You might even see an image or get a symbol of some kind that represents some steadiness in the midst of your fear. Just open up. You can do this practice over and over on a stubborn fear, or with many of the ones that may flow through your life. But as we open up and befriend each one, it's not that we don't have fear, but we are just interacting differently with it. We have a new strategy to learn from it, to accept the guidance that it brings, and not trying to choke it into submission and choke our own life energies out of this. So just take a few deep, slow breaths as you come back and note anything that you want to remember. And we'll begin discussion in a moment for the people that are with us live. Thank you to those that are watching this later. We appreciate your patronage. We'd love for you to hit subscribe or comment or like. And we'll talk to you soon. I am with you. You are with me. Blessed be.